Welcome to your retro time machine back to my favorite time period, the 90s. We are on we're off to a good start. We're on episode number 72. We're going back to October of 1990. Let's go.
Viewer warning. The following program contains material that may be too intense for some viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
From the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street, man, those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
You know it's never a good thing whenever I mess up a word in the first sentence. We're in for a long one. Actually, this one's probably not going to be actually that long. I find the earlier I go in the 90s, the less I have to talk about just because the less memories I have at the time. Funny how that works out. But anyway, if you've never seen the show before, I pick a random month and year from the 90s, and I talk about it at length and give some facts on what happened, some stats, what have you, news stories, stuff about music, just whatever interests me. And then I also give my own personal memories and personal takes on things. Like I said, this is our 72nd episode and our 8th trip through 1990. At the time, I was 6 years old, I believe, and I was in first grade, living with my granny. By the way, if you see me look this way, I'm referring to my notes because I forget things. So I have stuff written down. Not a whole speech or nothing like that. I'm not going to read word for word off of paper or something like a politician giving a speech. But anyway, like I said, we just pick a random month and year. Like last week we're in 95. This week we're in 90. No rhyme or reason to it. Just like to jump around so that way people don't get bored with because sometimes if I talk about the same time period, some of the same things will be true and not much will change. So I just kind of jump around. I suppose once everything's done, I might put everything into playlists where it all goes in order. But anyway. That's enough about that. I do have a bonus episode that's coming out Friday, which will be this week, April 3rd. And it's my top 10 WrestleManias ranked. Because I'm a huge wrestling fan and it's WrestleMania season. So I'm just going to rank my top 10 WrestleManias. If anybody's a big wrestling fan out there, you can probably guess what my number one is. It's what a lot of other people's is. But you can watch the episode to find out the other ones. I try to do a bonus episode once a month. And it can be just about any category at all. But anyway, we're going to get into this week's episode. Like I said, we're in October 1990, and I was 6 years old, so some of these things, I don't remember, memories of them, but I'm definitely going to go back and look for some facts. Thinking of video games, so I'll get into this a little bit later, but with talking about the way TV's different these days. But video game is definitely different. Not just the obvious ways of when you bought a game back then. Like one of the main ways of people consuming video games back then actually wasn't consoles. I mean, it was building. It would become that pretty soon and was getting there. But one of the biggest ways that people consumed video games back in those days was the arcades, which were huge at the time. They weren't as big as they were back in the 80s, back when arcades really started. In fact, most of my memories of playing arcade games always came at laundromats and stuff. I never actually went to an actual arcade till I was an adult. I went to Dave & Buster's. I guess you consider that an arcade. I know it's not the traditional old school type, but still, it's full of games. But yeah. Like I said, back then mostly I was going to laundromats, but during this time, there was a lot of those arcades still open, and probably the biggest, the top grossing game for the month, and probably the biggest one of that year was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game. I mean, that thing was classic. They ended up releasing that on the NES as the second Turtles game, but just, porting over the arcade game because it was so much fun. It was just, it was an old school classic fighting game, but with the turtles, and it was just everything. It was so perfect. Never got to play it in the arcades, sadly, but did play it on Nintendo. But yeah, Turtles back then, of course, were huge. This is 1990. This is the year of the very first Turtles movie. The cartoon series had been on for 3 years, so they were, in their peak. And the Turtles concert, which everybody finds cheesy, but it's my favorite thing of all time, Coming Out of Our Shells tour. I mean, the Turtles in 1990 were probably at their peak at that time. Like, you couldn't get away from. You hear the word before that. You hear the word turtle, you just think of the animal. You hear the word turtle in 1990, even if you don't have kids and an adult, you were probably thinking of the Ninja Turtles. That was how huge that was at the time. I mean, Turtles are still pretty big business today, but peak popularity wise, nothing like back in 1990. There were some movies that came out this month. A couple of them there were horror movies, because of course it being October. And I do have a list that I'm going to give of my top horror movies of that year in just a minute. But I do want to talk about the movies that actually came out in the theaters this month. The first one was the Night of the Living Dead. And I know you're probably thinking, I thought that was older than that. It is. This is the remake in 1990. It's made by Tom Savini, who was a protege of George Romero, who did the original Night of the Living Dead. And he did one of my favorite movies of all time, Creepshow. And he does the effects for everything. I mean, he worked on the first Friday the 13th. He's a legend in not just the horror movie business, but the movie business. But this was his movie that he directed, and it was a remake of the original one. And some people were like, it sticks too close to the original, or you can't seem to win. And I know nowadays I complain about remakes all the time, because that seems like all they do in Hollywood is just make remakes. Back during this time, it wasn't a big thing. It wasn't revolutionary and new, but it also wasn't something that it was like, oh, another remake. But I actually liked this remake. The way they did it, two things had changed that I kind of liked. The first thing was the main character, Barbara, one of the main characters. She isn't like this, like I didn't like in the original. Like I realized why they did it, and it was, it doesn't make the original movie bad, but she was just almost catatonic, just sitting there crying, barely talking. I don't want to say the word worthless, but pretty much when they were all trying to board up everything, she was just getting in the way, basically not helping, just because her brother had been killed, and she's on freaking zombies everywhere. But in this one, she's more assertive. She's more of like that typical it isn't really a slasher movie, but the slasher movie, the final girl where she takes out everybody. She's more in that role, which I actually preferred. But I also see why the original did that. And also with Ben, he is the other main guy who, like if you've never seen the movie, it's zombies come back. It's it's not like Return of the Living Dead where they like this poison was dropped everywhere. It may be implied, but it's not like Return of the Living Dead obvious. You get this stuff on you, you become a zombie. But and they find this farmhouse. Like I said, the girl's brother's murdered in the cemetery. She wanders off to the farmhouse. The guy Ben's already there. Turns out there's people in the basement. There's a couple with a daughter, which you don't know at the time, was bit by a zombie and becomes one. And then there's this other couple, this like younger couple from around the area. But the couple with the daughter, the guy is just a jerk. He wants everybody to stay down in the basement. He don't want to let anybody in. He don't want to help shore up the upstairs, and him and Ben clash. But anyway, at the end of the first one, I didn't like it just because of the way it ended, but I also understood completely why Romero did it. He was, and it was probably had a lot of his, stuff back then had like political stuff to it, like the way they treated the zombies, and this one touched on it too. But anyway, they survive the night, and the police are coming. They're burning the zombies. That's the only way to kill them, basically, completely. And Ben survived the night, and he just looks outside to see what's going on, and one of them was like, got another one, and shot him in the head. It's like, and he wasn't a zombie. It's like such a depressive ending. And this one, he actually like becomes a zombie, and I think she ends up having to shoot him. So it's, it's, those two little differences, and I'm sure there are other ones that I'm not thinking of, but as far as like which one's better and which one's not, probably put the original one just because it's the original one. But the second one is like, if one is one, then the other one 1A and 1B basically. Both movies are great. And then the other movie that came out that month that wasn't as great, but it's still a fun watch. Just if you like, kind of gross out, not exactly gross out, but it involves rats. Okay, it's called Graveyard Shift. It's based on the Stephen King short story from his. I think it was his first short story collection, Night Shift, which Stephen King's got some great short story collections. As much as he's known for his novels and It and all that, Pet Sematary and all, the big ones, Carrie. I could go on and on if I'm trying to name big Stephen King books that have been turned into movies. But as much as he's known for his novels, his short story collections are really good too. A great mixture of different types of stories in there too. It's it's not just this, you're reading, it's a bunch of stories, Stephen King, it's going to be the same thing. It all manages to seem different. And he has, I don't know how many short story collections he's had by now, 6, 7? Oh God, I did not mean to say that stupid thing. New people these days and their stupid catchphrases they get stuck on. Anyway, back to this. This movie, like I said, not the greatest movie. It's about people that work at this textile mill, and the boss is a jerk. And this new guy that works there is like always challenging him, like you can't treat employees like this. I'm gonna report you and stuff. And but anyway, they end up having to clean out this like sub basement part of the place because I think some kind of health department or some kind of violations. Anyway, these employees volunteer, more like made by the boss, to work the July 4th weekend, and they encounter these giant rats and stuff. It's crazy. Like I said, that's about the only gross out part. It's not like the guts and tons of blood, but it's cheesy. Came out in 1990, but it's definitely in the cheesy 80s horror vein. But that leads me to my what I'm calling my top 6 horror movies of the year. Because of all the horror movies that came out, these are the 6 that I like, so I'm going to rank them. And I just gave my number 6 and 5. Number 6 is Graveyard Shift. Number 5 is Night of the Living Dead. Now coming in at number 4, the second of 3 things on this list that are from Stephen King. I mean, just in 1990 alone, he had 3 things that come out that were pretty big. Although I wouldn't call Graveyard Shift one of his biggest ones. A lot of people haven't even seen it, let alone remember it. But number 4 is a classic, and not in a horror monster horror movie style, but more of a I guess it would be considered more of a thriller, but I still consider it a horror movie. Is Misery, a classic with James Caan and Kathy Bates. There is so much iconic things from that. Of course, the scene where she hobbles him, hits him with the hammer and the ankles and breaks both ankles. That's one of the most gruesome scenes ever on TV, and they only showed the one. It was directed by Rob Reiner, by the way. Of course, rest in peace to him. Horrible what happened to him and his wife last year. I think there was I can't remember if that was last year or this year. Recording this in 2026, by the way. But anyway, great movie. Kathy Bates is amazing at the crazy woman. If you want some different not takes of the movie, but read the book definitely. There's big differences in what I won't give it away, at what she does to him. It's not the classic break the ankles thing. It's almost even worse what happens to him. And there's a point where he's crawling around underneath the house. Like I said, I won't spoil too much. But also, if you're into finding out backstories, you want to find out why Kathy Bates' character Annie is so psycho and everything. Check out the second season of the series Castle Rock. I can't remember if that was an HBO exclusive or where it's at streaming these days. I know the first season, and you can actually watch the second season without watching the first season. But the first season is good. It's got Bill Skarsgård, of course, who plays Pennywise in the newer It movie, and Welcome to Derry, which Welcome to Derry is an amazing series. Can't wait for that to continue. But anyway, it is that first season is like really hard to understand at times what's going on, but you eventually get it. The second season has some elements from that, but like I said, I don't think you need to even watch the first season at all if you just wanted to get to the second season. But anyways, basically the backstory of Annie Wilkes, as a younger person, and you get to see, what pretty much leads up to where she ends up, before Misery. So it's kind of a cool backstory if you're into those type of things. I know they go back and retroactively write this, so they're actually, writing stuff after the fact. But I guess doing that makes it a little bit better because you know all the facts that happen after, as opposed to, writing someone's backstory at the beginning. I don't know, it feels kind of more special. I don't know if that makes any sense. Shut up, ESPN. Anyway, coming in at number 3, what I consider to be the real Creepshow 3 is Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. And I say that because Creepshow 3, if anybody watches the Creepshow series, 1 and 2 are great. 3 was just basically people that got the rights to the name. It is one of the worst dog crap movies, I'm trying not to cuss on here, in the history of horror anything. If I made a worst movies of all time list, I guarantee that's last. Maybe I should do that one day, like worst movies I've ever seen. Guarantee it's last. But anyway, Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, is based on the Tales from the Dark Side series, which was started in 1983, my birth year, by basically the same company that worked on Creepshow. George Romero was part of it, Tom Savini, Richard Rubinstein, a lot of the people that worked on those Creepshow movies. But it's it was like I said, it was this weekly series in syndication where they would just it wouldn't always be horror like monsters. Sometimes there would be other types of horror involved with it. And speaking of monsters, they actually came out with a series called Monsters, which dealt more with just actual monsters. It was basically it's a funny story I was telling my wife the other day. I've told her a million times. One of those stories you tell people over and over again just because you like it. But I was a kid, and it was before 1990. It was like late 80s. So it was before this, but still, it's relevant to this. I would go to my dad's house because it was after my mom and dad split up, and I would go there, because he lived with my grandpa. I was, stay with the whole family for the weekend. But on Friday nights, we would always watch Tales from the Dark Side. What I thought we were watching 2 episodes of it. Okay, so and then I always remember a commercial. What I thought was a commercial of this like family, like one guy looks like a potato head, and they're like monsters, and they're I always thought it was like a local commercial because I could never find it as an adult. Once the early days of YouTube at first, I put in like potato head, Tales from the Dark Side commercial, and eventually I found out it wasn't actually a commercial, but it was a whole other series called Monsters. And like I said, the family. If you ever seen the show Monsters, the opening sequence where they're all sitting around getting ready to watch the show Monsters, I thought that was like some local commercial because there was also local commercials like watch Tales from the Dark Side, didn't even because they always have commercials on when you're watching something for the thing you're watching. It's like, what's the point? But anyway, just a funny story I gave. It's not really funny, just one of my favorite memories of childhood is watching that show. But anyway, this is a movie based on the show, and it really doesn't like the show is basically like a standalone. It's like a Tales from the Crypt, except it doesn't have a crypt keeper. It just has like an opening, like this creepy scene, and this voice telling you, there's always a dark side, and then they just get into the story. Well, in this one, this is kind of like a creep show where there's a wraparound segment plus individual stories. The wraparound segment is this witch who kidnaps this boy, and he locks him in this thing, and she's gonna cook him for all her witch friends apparently. So she's getting the stuff ready. He ends up finding one of her favorite books of all time, is a Tales from the Dark Side book. And of course, by this time, the Tales from the Crypt series had already started. So that was and Tales from the Crypt itself inspired Stephen King and George Romero, who did Creepshow, to make Creepshow. So it's all kind of intertwined. Huge Tales from the Crypt fan, as if you couldn't tell. But anyway, he basically is like reading her stories, trying to stall, and at the end he eventually ends up able to shove her into the oven. But yeah, but there's stories in between. There's one about a mummy. There's one about a like cat that's like killing this old guy because he like he worked at a drug company and tested all his stuff on like thousands of cats and killed them. So it's basically revenge. There's also one about a gargoyle. It's a great movie, but like I said, I consider that the third Creep Show. A lot of people do too. It's not officially, but it's one of the story. I think the Cat from Hell story, and it's actually a Stephen King story. The one I was talking about, the cat. So that's another reason a lot of people consider it like a Creep Show 3. But anyway, coming in at number 2 is actually not a movie that was released in theaters, but was on TV and made a huge impact on a lot of people. Was Stephen King's It. That's right, the 4-hour miniseries that occurred over I think it was 2 nights. I don't think it was like weekend and then next weekend. I think it was 2 nights in a row. But I mean, obviously one of the iconic Pennywise the Clown, which a lot of people now associate with, like I said, the newer one. I still prefer the old one to the newer movies, but I appreciate what they did too. I'm not saying the newer movies are bad. Although for some reason, I didn't really enjoy the first one as much as I did the second one. I don't know why that is. But anyway, this was obviously Stephen King's huge story about this, clown who's not really a clown. He's more of like a shapeshifter. You get more into the lore as you're reading the book. But, he manifests as a clown mostly because that's what, these kids were scared of. And that's where a lot of the fears, I mean, there was obviously fears of clowns already. But once It came out, like, that was it for a lot of kids. They're like, we don't want no clowns around at all. Poor Bozo the Clown. I miss Bozo the Clown. I used to watch that every Sunday morning on WGN, the Chicago station. Can't wait till they get to the end of the grand prize game where you got to throw the balls into the buckets, each one farther away, and if you make it in there, you win a bigger prize. Always wanted to go on that show. Love Bozo the Clown. But anyway, yeah, Stephen King's It, an iconic. The miniseries was so good. It had a lot of great actors in it. I believe they sorry, yawning. They did that perfectly. As a miniseries, and it was, like I said, it was a TV miniseries, so there wasn't a lot of blood. If that had been a full movie, who knows what they could have done with it. But back then they weren't making movies that long, or part 1 here, they weren't doing that then. That's a newer thing, so I don't know if that would have even worked, or people would have been like, oh, enough time's passed, we don't care about the rest of it. I don't know. They did have sequels, obviously, but that's the type of story where there's really no. You can't, how it ends at the end of the first night where, Stanley, like, cuts his wrist in the bathtub and, it says It on the thing and then it kind of fades out. If you'd have done that in the theaters and then made them wait like 1 or 2 years to come back for the second part, people would have been like, this is stupid, why end there, But anyway, it was great as a miniseries, I believe. A lot of good Stephen King miniseries in the 90s, by the way. I could probably do I might do a thing on that, on Stephen King miniseries. But anyway, my number 1 horror movie of the year is one of my all-time favorites, Child's Play 2. That's right, our old pal Chucky. No, obviously the first Child's Play was a classic. This one, Child's Play 2, is actually my favorite Chucky movie of all time. I've watched it a ton of times. I believe it's the right amount of humor without being too over the top. Kind of like with some of the Freddy movies, where I think the third Freddy movie is kind of like peak, even though I like the first one the best. The third one, The Dream Warriors, I think was kind of the peak as far as like a balance between Freddy being funny and Freddy being scary. Same with Chucky here. He was a lot more scary than funny, but he had a lot of one-liners and didn't get too over the top to where it's like, okay, come on. But yeah, I love this movie. It's, follow Chucky again. He comes back to life. And, he follows Andy, who's in a foster home now, and goes out to the foster parents, and everybody thinks Andy's crazy. The doll's not moving and all this stuff, and then suspects him again of killing like the foster father. But of course, it's revealed that Chucky did it, and you meet Alex, his not really his stepsister, but I guess the foster sister, I guess you'd call her, and you know, she don't believe him at first either, but then of course realizes what's going on, and you know, helps Andy. And if you follow the Chucky's TV series, which sadly got canceled, you know, she makes appearances in that, and also I can't remember if she's in the Cult of Chucky. I can't remember if she was in that or not, if she made an appearance in that. But I know the original actor of Andy did, and they were also in, like I said, the Chucky series, which is really good. I hear they're going to make another Chucky movie since they've canceled the series, which is always great, as long as they don't go too crazy. Seed of Chucky, I'm looking at you. That movie's just messed up. But anyway, that's my top 6 horror movies of that year, 1990. Talking a little bit about wrestling now. Not really much WWF news, but I was called the WCW, but they weren't called WCW at the time. That was just the name of the program on Saturday night. Before it was WCW Saturday Night, it was just World Championship Wrestling by the NWA, which of course was, you know, it was originally Jim Crockett Promotions, but they had become so popular that they just basically took on the NWA name. People know that company as the NWA, not, you know, Jim Crockett Promotions. But anyway, we had the NWA Halloween Havoc 1990, which was the second Halloween Havoc, and this was October 27th from Chicago, Illinois. And on this show, NWA World Tag Team Champions Doom with Teddy Long would wrestle Ric Flair and Arn Anderson to a double countout. Stan Hansen defeated NWA US Champion Lex Luger to win the title. And in the main event, NWA World Heavyweight Champion Sting retained his title. He defeated Sid Vicious. So, you know, classic there, early 1990s, early 1990s. Shut up, ESPN. You can find it on there, by the way, I think. No, you can't. I think it's Netflix that has the pay-per-views now, but I don't know if they have the WCW ones or just the WWE ones. Anyway, that's a whole other topic where I wish they would have never got rid of the network or paid to have it all in one place. Now you got to have 10 different freaking apps to see. Sorry, net pain to see all the different WWE content these days, it seems. Some more news from wrestling. On October 1st, the very first episode of UWF, Universal Wrestling Federation, Fury Hour debuted on Sports Channel America, and it would last about a year. And I've talked about that company before, owned by Herb Abrams, the guy that was like, he died, and he was like, had baby oil all over him, was naked, and like, it was on massive amounts of crack. Like that I've talked about that before in one. That was a whole crazy story. A guy trying to create a wrestling federation. Sounds like something Tony Khan from AEW would do these days. But anyway, another bit of wrestling news. October 2nd was the pro wrestling debut of Chris Jericho, which is, I believe he's still wrestling now. I don't know if he's actually still wrestling or waiting out a contract or whatever it is. But anyway, you know, significant news there. I want to talk this time about kids' meal toys. Obviously, those were huge. And at this time, October was always the month where they gave out the Boo Buckets at McDonald's. You know, the Ghost. I can't remember, was the Ghost? The Pumpkin. And I can't remember if the other one was like a witch, I think. I can't remember. But, you know, because all the kids wanted those. As kids, I never got Boo Buckets. I always had pillowcases. And if we went to a rich neighborhood, we always had a garbage bag, so we could empty our pillowcases into the garbage bag. There was one time we had almost a full freaking garbage bag. I can't remember what year that was, but man, we had candy for months and months, I'm telling you. Burger King at the time had the Simpsons dolls, which were I remember these things. They're like the hard rubber, and they're a pretty good size for a Happy Meal toy. Well, sorry, kids meal toy. It's not McDonald's. I don't want to ruin their copyright with Burger King. But yeah, it was there was one for each of the Simpsons family. Wendy's had these really cool things, Halloween Play-Doh Fingles, as they're called. They were these Play-Doh molds, and they gave out Play-Doh with them. And it was actual Play-Doh, not like some off-brand. But there's also some glow-in-the-dark Play-Doh that they had. but they made these Halloween finger puppets. You know, guys, like I said, some of them glowed in the dark because of the Play-Doh. So some really cool toys there. And then Hardee's had Smurf, you know, those little PVC Smurf figures. Well, these were Smurfs on skateboards. So for some reason, Smurfs wanted to skateboard. All right, and as far as TV news, there was a debut this month that was a pretty significant show. It's Beverly Hills 90210, of course, debuted on Fox. They would last 10 seasons and 293 episodes. And, of course, spin-off Melrose Place. And I believe they had a newer version of 90210 and like a... I don't know if it was not a documentary, but like almost like a reality show with like the actors from it. Like, I'd say reality show, only they're like living in a house together or competing or anything. It was... I don't know. I haven't seen it, so I don't exactly know what it is. But anyway, I remember at the time, and my wife remembers the same thing, like, you know, a couple years after this was out, it was like, you know, parents wouldn't allow, you know, younger kids to watch it, or even some teenagers to watch it, and it had this, like, reputation of being, like, this, like, terrible show, and it was, like, you know, almost like, it almost was treated like the Jerry Springer Show was a couple years after this, where, you know, kids shouldn't be watching this. And I watched the first season, and like more than halfway through the second season, and I'm like, where was the controversy? Yeah, they had themes of like sex and stuff, but no, they didn't treat it like, you know, oh, this person's sleeping with this person. It was like, you know, like going through, like, you know, I don't want to get into detail in here, but like, you know, the girl was like, you know, I should wait for, you know, marriage, or I should, you know, I don't know about doing this and that. You know, it was more like, you know, teenagers going through like moral dilemmas, and, you know, some of them making the wrong decisions, but they never glorified anything. Like, you know, one of them like had stolen a car and was like, it was drunk driving and stuff, but they didn't make it, you know, it was basically, you know, a warning to teenagers, basically, you know, don't do this type of behavior. I seen it more as a teaching tool than, you know, but I guess it probably, just like some things, it got like a bad reputation. And I don't know if, you know, later on and later seasons, if maybe that was the reason for it. Maybe in later seasons they do more of that salacious, you know, stuff that they do on like soap operas. You know, because soap operas, from what I've seen of the first 2 seasons of 90210, was soap operas was like bad for you, and it was on in the middle of the day, although kids weren't watching it. But still, like I said, it I don't know, because there was also a lot of pushback for like sex education, you know, starting around this time too. You know, you shouldn't teach kids that, and you know that's a whole other debate. I'm not trying to get into anything like that, but like I said, it seemed about as wholesome as stuff you'd watch on Nickelodeon, basically, but just, you know, more mature themes, but not like anything. Like I said, they certainly weren't showing people doing anything, let alone like glorifying doing anything. It's just, I don't know what it was. If you were around during this time and remember hearing about, oh, you can't watch that show, or if you've even seen the show and like I said, later on it gets a reputation for a reason, let me know. But like I said, so far, because I didn't watch it then, I wasn't allowed to. So far, what I've seen, it's something that I would, you know, show teenagers and be like, you know, see what happens when you do this. You know, see how this person did this, and you know, it always had a theme of like, you know, you should go to your parents about things. You know, not have secrets, not to do this, not to do that, not, you know, it wasn't the other way around. Like, you know, ooh, go and do this. You know, like they do with shows nowadays, where they glorify drugs and everything else. Like during this show, they definitely did not glorify it. They showed you exactly the horrible things that would happen. It was like an after-school special, but they wouldn't let kids watch it. Anyway, I'm gonna that's one difference, like I said, in between TV and then and now. But I mean, in technical terms about the way TV, like there's so many things I could talk about. Trying to discuss the differences between the way TV is nowadays and it was back then. Obviously, the way we consume things is one of the biggest differences. Back then, you know, the biggest way to watch TV was obviously with the antenna. You know, your local channels. You know, if you're in a a good area, where I'm living now, I'm not. I have an antenna with a booster and still can't get nothing. But back then, if you're in a good area, you had the main channels: ABC, CBS, NBC, and then Fox became a player in the late '80s. And then later you get WB and UPN and all those. And then there would be like the local, like, we had one called Star 64 in Cincinnati, where they would show, it was basically like a syndication channel. And I think eventually became like UPN, I think, or something like that. I know WB and UPN switched off from different channels. We had local channel 25, which is where I discovered ECW wrestling. They at one point were WB and UPN and all that. But like I said, antenna TV was not the channel today, but like using the antenna on the TV was a big thing then. Of course, they ended up changing that, I think, towards the late 90s, early 2000s, where everything was going digital. You had to get I think that was the big thing. It's like the government mandated it. I don't know why the government is involved with TV the way it is. I don't understand that. If somebody does, let me know why the government said you have to convert to this type of TV. But anyway, they were converting everything to digital. I think it had something to. I think what it was is so they could like put parental blocks, because a lot of the newer models of TVs, with the later 90s, started coming out with the things built into the TV where you could block certain programs based on the rating. The TV would each show would have a rating, and it would be like, I guess, broadcast through the air what the rating was. And if it was over a certain rating that you didn't want your kids or whoever to watch, it would block it. You couldn't watch anything during that time. But anyway, I think that's why the reason of the digital thing is just so that way every TV could comply. If you didn't have the digital antenna, or you didn't have a built-in thing in your TV that was like after a certain date, you had to get like the special digital, either digital antenna or a special little device to put on your TV. It was a whole thing. But of course, if you had cable, that didn't matter, because you could actually like program stuff into the cable box also to do parental blocks. But even cable changed from 1990 to now. I mean, obviously. I remember back then, depending on what cable system you were on or time period, you had one or two things. You had like the basic cable box with like this basic remote, like channel up, channel down, the volume. Those like vinyl, like the top was like almost felt like vinyl, like a plastic material you're pushing. But then I also remember these one things. They were remotes, but they were like plugged into the thing. They weren't wireless, and there was this big like square box. I'm drawing a square like you don't know what square is. These big boxes, and each channel had its own button. And like you had like, I think 30 channels on cable at the time. Like, that was a big deal, by the way. And you manually push a button down to go to that channel, and it would have the guide on it. Not the guide of what's on, but like what the channel is, so you know what you're pushing. Like, that was cable then. And of course digital cable would come out, and really like it blew me away at the time. You had like 70 channels now, and you got this remote, and there's actually a on-screen guide, because of course back in the day you'd have to get to sit there watching to see watch the TV guide channel or whatever the equivalent was in your area, where you would wait and it would scroll through the channels and what was on. If you wanted to see what was on, that was the way you did it. Or you get the newspaper, old-fashioned way, or the TV guide. But and then they came out with DVRs and TiVo and all that, where you could actually record things, save for later, which I loved. I did that all the time. And then of course I would transfer that to VHS, because that was another thing. You could hook your VCR up to either cable or your TV. You could run it to that and record what was on, and that was like the coolest thing in the world. Getting to, and a lot of things you see on YouTube, like classic stuff, were actually recorded that way. So glad that was a thing back then. And like I said, when the DVR came out, I would record stuff to that and then record it to the tape, because the DVR we had with our cable, we had Time Warner cable. This is around like 2003, 2004. each box held 35 hours of material. So, you eventually would run out. So, I would record the stuff to tape, so that way I can keep it, movies, TV shows, music videos, whatever. And then I would, clear that off the DVR and go again. And then now, of course, we enter the realm of streaming and everything. And, I certainly like the convenience of streaming. I like to be able to, I can find whatever episode I want on here. I don't have to manually go record it, or back in the old days, wait for something to come on. That's another thing that's changed, is like the way TV's consumed. Back then, you hear about must-see TV and TGIF, which I'll get into later. Appointment viewing TV was another buzzword at the time. Where you would, there'd be something on you had to see, unless you program your VCR, which once that was a feature, that became big for people. But, you couldn't do that for multiple things. You could, I don't think, unless I'm wrong. Maybe you could, I can't remember. I never really used the programming feature, because I never had a VCR, to record off a TV. We had the family VCR, but, I didn't have blank tapes at my disposal. They weren't as easy to get as they are today. Which, by the way, I remember the trick. If you got a tape and you want to record over what's on it, you put a piece of tape over the hole, and it lets you record. Same thing with the cassette tape. If you want to record over like an actually produced tape, you would do that. They would also sell blank VHS tapes or cassette, audio cassette tapes with the tabs covered. But if you wanted to protect what was on there, you broke the tabs off. But of course, you could always put little pieces of tape over it, and it would treat it like it was, go ahead and record. It's funny the way that worked out. Like such a low-tech thing. But yeah, like I said, the way TV was consumed, you used to sit down and watch stuff. My show's on, I got to be there at this hour, this time to watch it. Nowadays, and that was what all the TV ratings were based on. And TV ratings back then were huge. And they're very low today, and it's not the fact that people don't watch things, it's the way that they watch them. Even before streaming, you could, like I said, first you could program it on your VCR, but then when you had TiVo or DVR, you could program it on that. Program it to, set, either, that time that week to watch the show, or even had a feature where you could just, anytime it came on, and you could include reruns, so you could have a lot of control of what you record. But that way you didn't have to watch it at the time. And that was when they started realizing that TV ratings weren't everything. And being a wrestling fan, that's all you ever heard about, any kind of wrestling news is, oh, what's the TV ratings for Raw? What's the TV ratings for Nitro this week? And they fought each other in the ratings wars, because those were big things, because the ones with the highest ratings get more advertising. That was, that's the way TV made their money, was advertising. So now, nowadays the ratings are very low, and it's not necessarily because people don't watch the content. Like with me, I don't have, an antenna. Like I said, I can't watch live TV. I don't have cable, but there's, a few shows that I watch, current season, like try to watch each week, or, but that's the thing. If I get a couple weeks behind, it's fine. I can just, I can watch them at my leisure. But, I have a few shows I watch, like ABC's The Rookie, 911, of course, Law & Order, I almost said it wrong, SUV, I always say that wrong, SVU. But I can go on there, but of course you have to have the streaming. That's another thing, is you have to have the individual streaming things for those, which sucks. That's another thing, it's just, out of control. People cut the cord for cable to save money, but to get everything that you need from cable to watch, if you're watching current things, or even not current things, just things from the past that are on different things, you gotta spend this, and then they're always, Netflix, I heard, is up in their thing $1. I know it's $1, but that adds up over time. It's more and more money. Everything's raising their prices, I know, but still, it's ridiculous. But it's the way things are going, and I don't see it change. I'd say I don't see it changing. It may change in the future. Who knows? They'll come out with something these days where they just put, give you a surgery and put something in your head, and you just watch everything in your head. Completely take away from, back in the old days, it was, always like, because I was watching this thing, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, about TGIF, about how, when it started, most houses just had the one TV. Families would gather around the TV. That would be a big thing. When getting to the mid to later 90s, there would be more TVs in the house. Of course, a lot of that had to do with also video game systems, kids getting their own TVs. But, you go from the one family TV to maybe the kids have a TV in their room or another room. Maybe the parents have a TV in their bedroom. So, stuff gets splintered. And of course with Nickelodeon and stuff, most parents aren't going to want to sit around and watch Nickelodeon all day. It's the same every generation. My parents didn't sit around watching Nickelodeon when I was watching it. I definitely didn't watch any Nickelodeon stuff my kids watched, and they probably wouldn't watch anything their kids watched. I don't know, they might, I don't know. Sorry for the loud noise outside. First of all, the air conditioner in the background and the garbage truck outside. But anyway, that's just, it's a whole different experience, going from, the family gathering around the TV to watch, whatever was on, TV, you got to watch it then, to nowadays, individual streaming things, and just a lot of people, I'm sure there's definitely still families that'll watch TV together, and that's great. And I do watch stuff, I try to pick a couple of days of the week to make sure that I watch TV with my wife, so that way, we're not just behind on shows, but, we're spending that time together, because I know, spending time in front of a TV doesn't seem like you're spending time, but it really is, it's, it's doing things together, even if you don't pay attention to what you're watching, although I try to. She's always on her phone. I always wonder how she could pay attention to things, but like, oh, if you're watching what just happened, and she'll be able to tell me. It's like, if I'm on my phone, like, I don't know, I can normally only focus on one thing at a time. Like, if I'm on my phone, I'm on my phone. If I'm watching TV, I'm watching TV. I might check messages or here and there, but if I'm gonna play, I can't play a game while I'm watching TV, or I'll miss what happened. But yeah, it's just like I said, there's just something about the innocence of the time of, and I'm sure, and even back in the 80s, before I can even have memories of watching TV, I'm sure things were way different in the 70s, and I'd love for somebody that was, around in the 50s or 60s, to comment on here and tell me what TV experience was like back then, because I guarantee completely different experience. Like the stuff I experienced in the early 90s, like the big remote and stuff, was probably high tech to people that were back to 2 or 3 channels, all black and white, and only on certain times, after midnight or after a certain time, the national anthem would play. I'm after that generation where, TV would go off, they'd have the national anthem, and, there would be nothing on TV. I'm after that generation. I'm the paid programming after 2 a.m. generation, and cable and all that stuff. But it's just fascinating to me to compare the different time periods, because just like in one category, like TV, just to compare and see, where we were, where we are now, and where we were even before I was a Wii, or me, or I don't know what I'm saying. I'm a Wii, apparently. And I'm a Nintendo Wii. I like that system. Some of the games. Anyway, I'm way off freaking topic here. We're going to talk about sports, because this being October 1990, me being a Reds fan, this was the last glory days of the Reds, seemingly. This was a time when there was, in baseball, there was, 2 leagues, obviously National and American, just like now, but they were separated in 2 divisions, the West and the East. And for some reason, the Reds were in the West Division, the Western Division. I don't know why. This wasn't like the early pioneer days where, where maybe Ohio was as far west as we got until we moved farther west to like Texas and stuff. But for some reason, they looped the Cincinnati Reds into the Western Division. Western teams like with Los Angeles. I mean, anyway, we won the West. How the Reds won the West? No, the Reds won the West and the Pirates won the East, which is really funny because Pittsburgh is literally connected. The state of Pennsylvania is literally connected to Ohio, but somehow they're in the East and we're in the West. I don't know. I am so glad they realigned the divisions and separated it into 3 divisions, and we're now in the Central with the Pirates. which is about where we should be. Anyway, in the American League, the Athletics won the West and the Red Sox won the East. And in the series to get to the World Series, which is, the championship series, the Reds defeated the Pirates 4-2, and the Athletics swept the Red Sox 4-0. And in the World Series, and this was a time when people were talking about the A's, the Athletics, the A's, like they were the next Major League Baseball dynasty. Well, we completely upset the A's and swept them 4-0. And this was what was called the wire-to-wire season for the Reds, because we were in first place from the day the season started, because of course everybody's tied, at the very beginning of the season. But, from the very beginning, we never lost that first place from the very end, and then, we won the World Series. So a big year for us. One of our big players, Eric Davis, he dove for a ball, and I think it was I can't remember his liver or his kidney. They basically either lacerated or ruptured or something. He had to get rushed to the hospital and couldn't even celebrate the World Series win, and that would actually affect him for the next few years of his being able to play. But it was like I said, a huge thing for the Reds. We wouldn't make the playoffs again until 1995, and then again until 2010. And then, from 2010, we've made, 4, 5, maybe 6 playoff appearances, somewhere in that range. But we've never made it past the first round in all those appearances. So hopefully that changes this year. But yeah, that was a big time for the Reds. But since then, it's pretty much been a drought for the Reds and the A's. The A's wouldn't get back to a World Series since then. Same with the Reds. And the A's, they're in Las Vegas now. But for some reason, they can't use the word Las Vegas in their name. I don't know why, what the deal with that is. But they're literally don't have a city. They're literally called the Athletics. Not the Las Vegas Athletics. But anyway, they've been one of the worst teams in baseball for the last 10 years. But football was also going on at the time, of course, being October. They just finished Week 8. Leaders for the AFC were the Bengals, surprisingly, in the 90's. Of course, early, just the year or two before we were in the Super Bowl. This was before the drought of the 90's for the Bengals. But anyway, it was the Bengals, the Bills, the Dolphins, and the LA at the time Raiders. Now they're the Las Vegas Raiders. They're actually allowed to use Las Vegas in their name for some reason. The NFC, the Giants and the 49ers were both 7-0, perfect records. They would both actually get to 10-0 before they each took a loss. And then the Bears were also one of the leaders. The Super Bowl would, of course, happen in January, and the Giants would beat the Bills, which would, for them, sadly for their fan base, they would make the Super Bowl 4 years in a row, which is amazing, but they lost all 4 years, so that's got to be devastating. This year, the Bengals, we would actually make the playoffs in 1990. We destroyed the Oilers, which, of course, now are the Titans. I miss the old Houston Oilers. But then we lost to the Raiders in the division round. And, after that, it's pretty much crap for the Bengals. Just a few more things to talk about. I always want to talk about the music world. There's a lot of... I've never heard of any of these songs and 2 of the artists in this, but, I always talk about how I listened to country music back then, never listened to pop at all. The first #1 song for using the Billboard Hot 100 chart was Close to You by Maxi Priest. Never heard of that song or artist. I couldn't even tell you if that's a group, a female or a male. Just Maxi, I'm guessing, is a woman. I don't know. Never heard of them before. Praying for Time by George Michael. I've heard of George Michael. I don't think I've ever heard of any of his songs, but never heard of that song, obviously. James Ingram, whoever he is. I Don't Have the Heart. And then Janet Jackson with Black Cat, which I've never heard of that. Was it because it's Halloween? She's come out with this is the Halloween song? I don't know. Anyway, over in my music, American Country Countdown, it was all about Garth Brooks. He had just started on his giant rise to fame. I mean, his first album was big, but this song came out and it was massive. Obviously, Friends in Low Places. It was #1 for all of October, for 4 weeks, which was big in the country countdown back then. You didn't have multiple week #1s. But I mean, obviously, Friends in Low Places is the song that catapulted him to a superstar, and then it just built and built and built, and, you know, created the legacy he did for himself with all the huge hits and like super freaking exciting concerts. But yeah, Friends in Low Places was, you know, and I know a lot of people probably say that song's been done to death, and, you know, because they've heard it 50 million times. Well, there's a reason for that. To me, it never gets old. You know, it's a short song. It's you know, super meaningful. Where you gotta, you know, talking about saving the world. It's just, you know, I got friends in low places. You know, the song speaks for itself, and clearly was a massive song. There was an album that was released this month, which I've never actually heard the album, but I heard a lot of songs from it. It was Dwight Yoakam's 4th studio album called If There Was a Way. It featured the singles Turn It On, Turn It Up, Turn Me Loose, which was a fun song. You're the One made it to number 5, and is probably my favorite song from that album. A great, you know, old time, basically, country heartbreak song. Song called Nothing's Changed Here, which I've never heard. Which I've realized, when going back and looking at some number ones, like, from, you know, the 90s, there are some songs that I've never heard, but they made it to number 1. It's like maybe I've heard it, if, you know, if I'd hear it again, maybe I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. I haven't heard it in forever. But there's also some songs that didn't, you know, could get played more in other markets than others. You know, being in Cincinnati, our channel was B105. You know, that song probably wasn't on there a whole lot, but it might have been in other markets. It Only Hurts When I Cry, which is a kind of it's funny. It's funny to say it's a fun song, but it's a fun heartbreak song. Like, you know, he turns it into, you know, almost like a comical type song. The Heart That You Own is a really good song. And then Send a Message to My Heart, a duet with Patty Loveless, was not a number 1, but a single, and I'd never heard that one before either. And also during this month was the CMA Awards, which, you know, back then I watched. Now it's all music I can't stand and politics, and you know, I never really paid much attention to the awards like themselves. I would mostly watch these for the performances and everything. Although, you know, a lot of the times I did agree. Like, especially this year, Entertainer of the Year was George Strait. You know, can't go wrong with that. Album of the Year was Pickin' on Nashville by the Kentucky Headhunters. This is when they had their, you know, couple years of, like, you know, being like this huge thing. They were like this, you know, country band, but they had a lot of rock elements. They also had some bluegrass elements. They were just like, weird. they really stood out. Male Vocalist of the Year, Clint Black. Can't go wrong with that. Female Vocalist of the Year, Kathy Mattea, which didn't have as big of a career as people thought she would in the 90s. You know, she had a pretty big run at the end of the 80s, but, you know, by the early 90s, other artists would, you know, Reba McEntire, you'd start seeing Trisha Yearwood, Martina McBride, artists like that, you know, and she was kind of forgotten. Probably because she didn't have the vocal range of those, but, you know, still a good vocalist. Vocal Group of the Year, Kentucky Headhunters again. Vocal Duo of the Year, the Judds. And, of course, you know, soon they would, I can't remember if this was their last year or the next year was, but then, you know, once 92 hit, Brooks and Dunn came along, and they would win that award for almost a decade straight. Single of the Year and Song of the Year, which I've explained before. Single of the Year is more about how the song performed on radio. It goes to the artist. Song of the Year is more about the song's content, and the award goes to the songwriter. So Single of the Year was Vince Gill's When I Call Your Name, which of course Patty Loveless did background vocals on that amazing song. Song of the Year is called Where Have You Been, written by Don Henry and John Vesner, and it was recorded by Kathy Mattea. And it's a very sad song. It's about, deals with Alzheimer's disease. A very sad song, but definitely a lot of meaning behind it, and that's why it won Song of the Year. The Horizon Award, this was a stacked field. You know, Horizon Award, New Artist of the Year, whatever the ceremony awards are calling their award, is basically, you know, the up and comer, you know, who's going to have the bigger career. And can't disagree, you know, any of the people that would have been selected for this would have been a great choice, but Garth Brooks was the winner. And out of all of them, he had obviously the biggest success. But I mean, listen to the other nominees for this category: Alan Jackson, Kentucky Headhunters, Lori Morgan, and Travis Tritt. And I mean, a category like that, any one of those could have won on any other year if Garth Brooks hadn't been involved. And of course, this is, before Friends in Low Places really had an impact, because they'd already voted on these awards. So it wasn't just that song. Music video of the year went to The Dance by Garth Brooks. Very powerful song and very powerful video. If you hear the song, it almost seems like it's one meaning, but if you watch the video, you get Garth's real meaning behind it. So if you can find that video, watch it. Really good video. Vocal event of the year was the duet between Keith Whitley and Lori Morgan that was released after Keith had passed away. It was called Till a Tear Becomes a Rose. Great song. And the Hall of Fame inductee that year was Tennessee Ernie Ford. And then, of course, like I said, Garth Brooks would, perform Friends in Low Places on the show. And like I said, this was his ascent to the top, basically. Just a couple more things to talk about. I do want to, of course, go through our Nickelodeon lineup of the week. Actually chose Halloween this time, so I wonder if there will be any actual Halloween specials or anything, because this is early Nickelodeon, so it wasn't the the prime Nickelodeon that I remember from like the early 93, 94, 95, 96, that range. So I don't know exactly what we're going to get into here, but of course we're going to start at midnight, so we're going to be looking at Nick at Night. Well, it looks like they had an Alfred Hitchcock Presents marathon from midnight till 6 in the morning. Obviously Halloween related there. Alfred Hitchcock Presents, not looked at as more well known as The Twilight Zone, I believe. Most people, when they think of classic horror shows, they always think of Twilight Zone first. But Alfred Hitchcock Presents was just a really good, creepy show that was, it wasn't just horror. It had a lot of other themes. And I was just watching a couple episodes yesterday, in fact. Great show. And then we get to Nickelodeon at 6, we get Lassie. And a show called Kids World I've never seen. Then at 7, one of my favorite, Mr. Wizard's World. Learned so much from him. Science. A show called Don't Just Sit There. Don't know that one. Then we get Inspector Gadget. Classic. Same with Heathcliff. Oh great, now that song, Heathcliff. That song's going to be stuck in my head all day. And then we got Lassie again. Then we start Nick Jr. at 9:30 with Maya the Bee, which I've seen a couple episodes. Eureka's Castle, I watched like 4 or 5 of those last night. Remind me of how crazy that show was. Freaking Eureka was a wizard and always tried to do spells, but they always came out wrong. And Magellan was, him and his tail were always annoying people. And Batley was so freaking whiny. And the Moat Twins, Bog and Quagmire, were always fighting with each other. And the Fish Tones were always singing like classic. They don't have all of them, sadly, but they have like 20 episodes or something on Paramount Plus. Check that out if you got that. Love Eureka's Castle. Sharon, Lois, and Bram's Elephant Show. Skinnamarink dinky dink, skinnamarink doo. I love you. You had to have been there to know that song. And then Fred Penner's Place, which is sort of like the Elephant Show. Oh, and then at noon we got The World of David the Gnome, one of my favorite cartoons of all time. Man, this is just some classic stuff here. And then Adventures of Little Koala, Noozles, Maya the Bee again. Today's Special, whatever that was. Lassie again, and then followed by Flipper, because we got to have the Animal Saves the Day hour. Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon, Heathcliff again. Nickelodeon's Most Wanted, Yogi Bear, which is just Yogi Bear for Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon branding on it. Out of Here, I don't remember that. Hey Dude, love freaking Hey Dude, about the kids that work at the ranch during the summer. Mr. Ernst that runs it. You can't do that on television, one of Nickelodeon's original shows. It's a variety type show, love that thing. Make the Grade, I don't remember. Inspector Gadget again. Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon, and then of course at 8 we go back to Nick at Night, and we've got another marathon from 8 to midnight, and I don't know if it ended then or continued to the next. Oh, I guess I can look. for Alfred Hitchcock Presents again. I'm actually going to go to the next day and look and see if that continued or if it ended at midnight since Halloween was over. Nope, they let it continue. And then, oh, it looked like the next night it was on again too. On November 1st. This has got marathons of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. You know, if I would have been old enough and able to stay awake, I would have tried to stay awake from all the stay away from all those, stay awake for all of those. But quickly before we get out of here, I do want to talk about the TGIF lineup. I watched a really good documentary thing. It was on. It was just made by somebody on YouTube. It wasn't like a TV produced thing. And I can't remember the channel's name or the guy's name that was doing it. But it was called The Death of TGIF. Look that up on YouTube. It was a fairly recent video within this past week. So, if you find something recent, it's 45 minutes long. But it really goes into detail how TGIF was created and how it was ended. Learned a lot from it. A lot of good stuff in it. But I'll talk about the TGIF lineup at this time. Full House was in season 4. And of course, they would move to Tuesdays later on, and because they were a bigger show, they wanted on the night where they got more audience. Family Matters, they were into their second season, really hitting their stride. Of course, Urkel becoming a huge focal point of the show. Perfect Strangers, which is what Family Matters was spun off from, was in season 6. And then there was a show called Going Places, which is only on for one season, and I learned a little bit about it from the documentary I watched. In fact, they were not just one season, they were canceled after 19 episodes. It was a show about 4 Hollywood writers living together. I know TGIF was made for families, but really kids were probably not watching that. And from the looks of it, neither were adults. Sounds like a boring premise. And obviously it must have been a boring show. But if you have memories of it and actually liked it, there's a lot of shows that were on for a season and didn't even make the end of the season that a lot of people liked, but they canceled it for some reason. Whether it was an obscure show like that or something that people liked, it just seems like they're always canceling things people like. That's a whole episode I should do. Top shows that were canceled and never got a finale. That'd be a good bonus episode. But I want to thank you guys for joining me here. It's been a fun one this week. Got to talk a lot about different topics, especially like I said, the differences in between TV and now. But next week we're going to episode number 73. We're going to be in back to 1993, September of 93 to be exact. And this will be our 10th trip through 1993. We're into double digits now, the first time of a year, so we're getting close to the end. As a reminder, if nobody's watched this before or heard, once I do a full 12 months a year, I'm going to do another episode where I kind of go through almost like a year-end award type thing, where I give the top video games of the year, top songs of the year, another refresher of who won the championships in sports and awards for wrestling, that type of stuff. I'll save that for that episode, kind of like a recap. But I didn't want to do a recap where I just take clips from other episodes. And, I wanted to make something new, not just if you want to watch clips from those episodes, just watch the episodes. Anyway, like I said, next week, September 93. I was 9 years old and in 4th grade. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.
And now, I predict the future. Next week, you'll be in the same time, same place, same station, for another hideous, fateful haul of horror.